A man named Marcus Webb was thrown out of his father-in-law's estate in the middle of a Montana winter with nothing but two young boys, a duffel bag, and a German shepherd who had already survived one war. The iron gates of the Hargrove property closed behind him while snow hammered the valley and his sons shivered against his sides. What Victor Hargrove did not know, what none of them knew that night, was that 40 miles north in the ruins of a homestead that had been waiting decades for the right person to arrive, a truth worth $180 million was buried beneath the floor. And the only one who already knew it was the dog. The Hargrove estate sat at the edge of the Flathead Valley like something built to remind people of their place in the world. 3 stories of pale stone-lit windows on every floor, even at 11 at night, the kind of home that did not ask for your respect, but assumed it had always been there. Marcus Webb had lived inside those walls for 8 months. He had slept in the guest wing with his sons and tried to call it shelter and tried not to call it what it actually was, which was a cage that someone else controlled the key to. His wife Claire had been gone 8 months. He had counted every one of them. He was sitting at the kitchen table when the door to the study opened and Victor Hargrove walked in. Not his son-in-law's kitchen. Victor's kitchen. The man had never let Marcus forget the distinction. Victor was 64 years old and moved through rooms the way weather moved through valleys, with the certainty that everything in the path would simply adjust. He set a folder on the table without looking at Marcus. He straightened a cufflink. He sat down across from him with the particular kind of calmness that is worse than any raised voice because it means the decision has already been made. Scout lifted his head from the floor beside Marcus's chair. The dog did not growl yet. He simply watched Victor the way he had always watched Victor, with a stillness that held something coiled behind it. "I've filed for emergency guardianship," Victor said. "The petition was accepted this morning. My attorneys believe the case is straightforward. A man with documented PTSD, no income, no fixed address." He opened the folder and slid a paper across the table without touching the side where Marcus would reach for it. "The boys deserve stability." Marcus looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. Scout's ears moved forward, just slightly, a shift that anyone who didn't know the tone would miss entirely. "You're doing this now," Marcus said. "The arrangement was always temporary. Claire would have wanted the children properly provided for." Victor closed the folder. "Your permission to remain on this property has ended." There are moments in combat when a soldier understands a situation completely, and the understanding does not feel like fear and does not feel like anger. It feels like cold clarity, like every unnecessary thing falling away until only the essential remains. Marcus had felt it in Kandahar. He felt it now. He stood up slowly. He walked to the room where Owen and Eli were sleeping, and he stood in the doorway and looked at them for a moment, his twin sons who were 8 years old and had already lost their mother and did not know yet what was coming next. Owen had his arm around his pillow the way he used to hold the stuffed rabbit Claire had given him before she got sick. Eli was on his back, jaw set, even in sleep, always the one who tried to look like he wasn't afraid. Marcus put his hand on Owen's shoulder first. The weight of the boy under his palm was something he held on to. Then Eli's. He grounded himself through that weight, through their warmth, through the small sound Owen made waking up and seeing his father's face in the dark. "Dad!" Owen sat up. "Get your shoes on, bud. We're going somewhere tonight." Eli was already awake and already reaching for his jacket with the automatic efficiency of a kid who had grown up watching a soldier for a father. He did not ask why. He asked, "Is Scout coming?" Scout's always coming. The duffel bag was packed in 11 minutes. Victor's men, 2 of them in dark coats with the unhurried confidence of people who did this kind of work regularly, stood in the hallway while Marcus carried the bag to the front door. A framed photograph of Claire and Marcus on their wedding day was tucked under the clothes in the bag. One of the men bumped the side table on his way past, and the photograph frame on top fell and hit the marble floor, and the glass cracked across Claire's face. Marcus stopped walking. He looked at it for a moment. He picked it up and put it in the bag. Scout moved to stand directly between the 2 men and Marcus's sons. Low posture weight distributed forward, a sound beginning deep in his chest that had not yet become a growl but was on its way there. One of the men took a step back without appearing to intend to. Victor stood at the base of the staircase. He did not follow them to the door. "This doesn't have to be unpleasant," he said. Marcus turned and looked at him from across the foyer. He said it quietly the way he said most things that mattered. "Claire would know exactly what this is." He walked out. The cold hit all three of them at once, a January cold that felt personal, the kind that found the gaps in clothing and stayed there. The twin outdoor lights of the Hargrove gate were on, cutting two white circles into the snow on the driveway. Owen reached up and found Marcus's hand in the dark. Eli walked on his other side with his chin forward, trying. And Marcus watched his son doing that and felt something tighten in his chest that he didn't have room for right now. Scout walked ahead of all of them, nose lifting into the wind, scanning the tree line beyond the fence with a professional thoroughness that had nothing to do with the cold. The iron gate swung shut behind them with a sound like something final. Marcus loaded the boys into the back of the truck. Scout jumped in after them without being asked and turned himself in a circle and settled against Eli's legs, and Eli put both hands into the dog's thick fur without saying anything. The gate disappeared in the rearview mirror. Owen's voice came from the back seat, small and careful the way it got when he was trying not to upset anyone. "Dad, where are we going?" "Somewhere your mom always loved," Marcus said. He did not know if that was true. Claire had mentioned the homestead twice in all the years they were together, and both times with something complicated in her voice that he had not known how to ask about. But he knew the address from the paperwork in the manila envelope Claire's attorney had mailed him 3 weeks after the funeral. He had not opened the envelope for 6 of those 8 months. He opened it the night Victor told him about the custody filing, and the words inside made the only kind of sense available when everything else had stopped making sense. He turned the truck north. Snow was already coming down heavier than the forecast had promised. The highway into the valley was empty, at this hour the headlights pulling just far enough ahead to see the next curve and nothing beyond it. The heater worked intermittently. Marcus ran it until warm air came through, then it clicked off, then he ran it again. He wiped the condensation from the inside of the windshield with the back of his forearm. And then he was not doing that. He was standing at the window of a house in Kandahar at 3 in the morning watching the street below, and Claire was beside him doing the same thing, except they were not in Kandahar. They were in the apartment in Billings in December, and she was wiping the fog off the glass with her sleeve and laughing at the shape it made. "It looks like a rabbit," she said. "It doesn't look like a rabbit," he said. "Everything looks like something if you want it to," she said. The memory was there, and then it was gone, the way it always went, leaving behind a specific weight that settled somewhere between his ribs. In the back seat, both boys had fallen asleep against Scout. The dog was awake, looking out the side window at the dark passing fields. The homestead appeared when the GPS told him to turn onto a gravel road he would not have found otherwise. The truck's headlights swept across the property in a slow arc as he pulled in, and what they revealed was not encouraging. The roof of the main house sagged in the middle, holding a foot of snow that it looked unlikely to hold much longer. The porch railing had collapsed on one end. A window on the upper floor had been covered with plastic sheeting that the wind had partially torn free, the plastic snapping in the dark like a warning. The barn 30 yards behind the house leaned slightly to the east, as though it had been considering lying down for years and had not quite committed. Marcus sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running. The cold outside was absolute. He carried Owen and Eli walking beside him with his eyes half open, Scout going through the front door first the way he always went through doors first. The smell inside was mold and old wood and something underneath those things that might have been cedar from a long time ago. A portable heater, a sleeping bag, canned food in the duffel bag. That was what they had. Scout began moving through the rooms with methodical efficiency, nose to the floor, ears checking each corner, the same systematic pattern Marcus had watched him use, clearing buildings in places that were considerably more dangerous than rural Montana. He went through the kitchen, the back bedroom, the narrow room off the hallway that might have been a pantry. Then he came back to the main room and went directly to the stone fireplace that dominated the far wall and stood there with his nose inches from the base of the hearth and inhaled slowly and went still. He pawed at the hearthstone, a small sound low in his throat. Not a bark, not quite a whine, something between. "Easy, Scout." Marcus was laying out the sleeping bags on the floor. "It's probably a mouse nest, not tonight." Scout looked at him, then he looked back at the hearth. He sat down facing it and did not move again. Eli stood in the doorway between the hall and the main room, looking around at the cracked plaster and the ancient floorboards and the piece of plastic sheeting still snapping somewhere above them. His voice was very quiet. "Did Grandma Ruth know we were coming?" he asked. His voice was very quiet in the dark room, the kind of question a child asks when what they really mean is something harder to say. Marcus crouched down in front of his son. "She would have been glad we're here. This place was hers. That means it meant something." Eli looked at him for a moment. He nodded once in the way he had that looked exactly like Claire and went to his sleeping bag. The portable heater threw a thin orange ring of warmth that did not reach the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up and was moving through the eaves with a sound that made the house feel smaller than it was. Marcus lay on his side on the sleeping bag and watched the heaters glow and could not close his eyes without seeing the iron gate. Scout did not sleep. He sat in front of the hearth facing the stone until the gray beginning of morning came through the windows, and whatever he was listening to in the dark beneath the floor, only he could hear it. 3 days passed. The basic repairs that could be made with what Marcus had were made. He fixed the porch railing with lumber from the fallen section of the fence. He nailed plastic sheeting over the upper window properly and then covered it with a piece of board he found in the barn. He cleared snow from the roof edge to reduce the load on the middle section. Each morning he woke before the boys did and walked the property with Scout ranging ahead of him, the dome working in long, sweeping arcs through the snow-covered field, nose processing whatever the night had left behind. On the morning of the fourth day, Scout stopped at the edge of the field where the tree line began and stood with his ears locked forward and his tail still. Marcus stopped beside him. The trees were 100 yards away, dense pine, the kind of tree line that held its own darkness even in daylight. He scanned it. Nothing moved. The branches shifted with the wind, then stilled, then shifted again. Except one section. About 40 yards in from the road, a shadow among the trees did not move with the wind. It held the same position when the branches above it moved and when they stilled. Marcus watched it for 30 seconds. Then he looked away, counted 10, and looked back. The shadow was gone. Scout pressed against Marcus's right leg for a moment, then lifted his head and resumed walking the fence line as though nothing had happened. Marcus kept the information filed and said nothing to the boys. That afternoon, without mentioning it to Owen or Eli, he mounted a small trail camera in the barn eaves angled toward the access road. The kind of preparation that had kept him alive in places where waiting to see what happened next was not a strategy. The next afternoon, coming back from the hardware store in Whitefish with caulk and weather stripping, he spotted the truck on the north side of the access road. Black late model parked just far enough behind a row of brush to be mostly invisible from the main road. No headlights, no movement. Montana plates but too clean for a vehicle that belonged on these back roads in January, not a scratch of mud on them. Scout, riding in the passenger seat, turned his head toward the window and issued one sharp bark. Marcus did not slow down. He looked straight ahead and drove past. The boys were at the house. They didn't need to carry any more than they were already carrying. That evening, he found footprints in the snow behind the barn. Human. Hiking boots with the deep tread of serious gear. They led from the tree line to the near wall of the barn and then ran parallel to the wall for 20 feet before turning back and disappearing into the trees again. He crouched and measured the stride length with his hand. Someone who was not rushing. Someone who had done this before and was comfortable taking their time. The prints were less than a day old. He was still studying them when Eli came out of the back door, phone in hand, holding it out with a particular expression he got when something was wrong, but he was trying not to show how wrong. "This is from a number I don't know," Eli said. Marcus took the phone. A voicemail. He played it once, keeping his face still while Eli watched him. The voice was professional and careful. A lawyer's voice. "This message is for the minor children residing at the Callaway property address. Mr. Hargrove asks you to understand that he will be pursuing all available legal means to ensure his grandchildren are placed in appropriate care. He wishes the transition to proceed without complications." He deleted the voicemail. He handed the phone back. "Is that Grandpa's lawyer?" Eli asked. "Yeah. What does he want?" Marcus put a hand briefly on his son's shoulder and steered him gently toward the back door. "Let's get dinner going." He was carrying the firewood in from the pile beside the barn the next morning when the sound hit him. A Forest Service helicopter cutting over the ridge to the north, rotors thudding through the cold air in a sound that was specific and familiar and did not belong to January in Montana, and belonged entirely to a street in Kandahar at 2 in the morning 8 years ago. The wood fell. Marcus was standing in a field in Montana with snow to his ankles. Marcus was crouched behind a wall made of pale brick with a man named Torres breathing beside him, and the rotors getting louder and the radio crackling, and nothing resolved. The brick wall, the snow, dust, heat, a metal door swinging, a sound like a crack that he still heard sometimes when it was quiet. Both. He was in both places, and neither place was stable under his feet, and the distance between them was zero and infinite at the same time. Scout hit him broadside with the full weight of his body, 78 pounds, slamming into Marcus's left hip and staying there, pressing in warm through the layers of his jacket. The impact was the first entirely real thing. Marcus grabbed the dog's coat with both hands. The field in Montana. The field. The cold coming through his boots. Scout's breathing regular and deep against his leg. The helicopter already past the ridge and gone. Torres had gone home to Tucson. Marcus had been to the welcome home barbecue. Torres was fine. Torres coached his daughter's soccer team on Saturdays. The field in Montana. "I'm okay," Marcus said. His voice was steady enough. His hands were not. Scout stayed pressed against him for another minute, not moving, not looking at anything but Marcus. His weight was deliberate, like a command. By the time he carried the firewood inside, his hands had stopped shaking. Almost. The night of the sixth day came in hard. The storm that had been building in the mountains since afternoon arrived fully after dark, driving snow against the windows in sheets and pulling at the plastic on the repaired window upstairs and getting into the gaps around the front door that Marcus had not yet been able to seal. He cut the boys' reading time short and got them into their sleeping bags and built up the fire in the hearth, the wood catching slowly against the damp in the air. The power went out at 9:15. He had a lantern and 2 flashlights, and he set them at different points in the room. The fire was enough for light and almost enough for warmth. Owen and Eli were already asleep by the time the first sound came. A single impact against the north wall. Not a branch. Too deliberate for a branch. A sound that had intention in it. Scout was on his feet before Marcus had processed what he'd heard. The dog moved toward the north wall low and stood there listening. Marcus pulled on his jacket and took the flashlight and went out the front door and around the side of the house. Wind and snow. Nothing against the north wall. No tracks fresher than the ones already there. He stood and listened. The storm. He went back inside. 4 minutes later, a long, scraping sound along the side of the porch. Like something being dragged. Or like something running a hand along the wood in the dark. Scout crossed to the front door in 2 strides, muscles pulling tight under his coat. Owen was awake, sitting up, watching Marcus with the expression children get when they are frightened but are concentrating very hard on not being frightened. "What is that?" he asked. "Just a storm," Marcus said. He went out again. The porch was empty. The snow was undisturbed in the flat area in front of the steps. He shone the flashlight up and down the porch boards. Nothing. He stood on the porch for a long minute, letting his eyes adjust past the range of the flashlight, and the dark beyond the light did not give him anything. He was back inside door, closed, when the knock came at the front. 3 hits, hard and deliberate, the kind that are not looking for permission, but announcing something. Scout erupted toward the door with a sound that brought both boys upright. Marcus caught him by the collar and held, not because he was afraid Scout couldn't handle what was outside, but because whatever was outside needed to hear what Scout was. He threw the door open, snow dark. The empty porch and the empty field, and the tree line invisible beyond the wall of the storm. Nothing. He closed the door. He stood with his back against it and listened to the house and the storm and Scout's subsiding growl, and he understood with the part of his brain that had been trained to identify the difference between random events and patterns that these 3 sounds had not been random and had not been the storm. Someone was out there. Someone had wanted him to come to the door 3 times. Someone had been watching to see how he responded. Scout had already moved back to the hearth. The dog stood at the base of the stone fireplace and looked at Marcus, and then looked down at the hearthstone and put one paw against the 3rd stone from the left and pressed. He barked once, a single note, short and absolute. Then he began to dig. His claws found the gap between the third stone and the fourth, and he drove both front paws into it with a force that was not searching anymore. This was not the investigating he had been doing for 6 days. This was the behavior Marcus had seen when Scout was working, when the dog had passed through the phase of finding something and arrived at the phase of refusing to leave it alone until someone paid attention. Marcus crouched beside him. He pressed his palm flat against the third hearthstone and pushed. It moved. It moved a quarter inch to the left on a seam that was not a crack from age but a fitted joint machined and deliberate, hidden for decades under accumulated grime. Marcus pushed harder, and the stone slid 6 inches, and a cold breath of air rose from the darkness beneath it. Owen was behind him now, standing close. Eli beside him. Scout had stepped back from the stone and was standing perfectly still at the edge of the lantern's reach, with his muscles rigid and his eyes fixed on the opening. Marcus took the flashlight and shone it into the gap. Stone went down 8 inches to a hollow in the foundation. In the hollow, set into the floor of the house where the original builder had laid it before the hearthstones went down on top of it, was a steel box approximately the size of a large toolbox, flat black with reinforced corners and 4 fasteners running across the top face. Marcus had seen fasteners like those before. Not in Montana. He reached down. The box was heavier than it looked and cold from the stone that had been its roof for however many years it had sat there. He worked it out of the hollow and set it on the hearthstone and crouched over it. Eli made a sound behind him, something that was not quite a word. Scout circled the box once, nose running over the corners, and then sat. The dog looked at Marcus with an expression that had nothing uncertain in it. The fasteners had not rusted. They were stiff with cold, but they turned, and Marcus turned each of them in sequence, and the lid came open. Inside, wrapped in a shawl of faded gray wool, were 4 items. The shawl itself he recognized. Ruth Calloway's shawl from the photograph on the wall in the back bedroom, the one that showed an older woman standing in the field outside this house this summer, the woman Claire had her chin from. She had it around her shoulders in the photograph, and it was the same gray with the same small pattern of faded blue thread. Beneath the shawl was a sealed envelope in a handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. His name across the front in Claire's hand, the letter slightly rounder than her usual writing, the way she wrote when she was being deliberate. Next to the envelope, a USB drive in a waterproof case. Next to that, a folded document and a business card. He read the name on the card, Margaret Sloan, attorney at law, Kalispell, Montana. His hands were not entirely steady when he picked up the envelope. Owen said quietly from behind him, "She knew. Mom knew all of this." Marcus did not open the letter immediately. He sat with it in both hands for a long moment, and the fire snapped in the hearth, and Scout settled beside him with his flank warm against Marcus's leg, and outside the storm pressed against the house from every direction, and inside the room was warm enough, and the boys were close enough that he could hear them breathing. Then he opened it. The handwriting was her, Claire. The particular way she made her capital letters with a small, unnecessary curve at the base, the habit he had teased her about, and she had never changed. The letter was short. "Marcus, if you are reading this, then what I was afraid of has already happened. I need you to listen carefully and not waste time being angry at me for not telling you sooner. There will be time for that. Right now, there isn't. My father has been hiding something from me for most of my life and from you since the day I introduced you to him. He will use every weapon he has against you, your service history, your diagnosis, your finances. He has been preparing for this longer than you know. Everything he has done is documented on that drive. Everything. Take it to Margaret Sloan. She is the only attorney who has seen the full picture, and she has been waiting for you to show up. Do not contact my father. Do not respond to his lawyers without Margaret present. Do not wait. Get to Kalispell. Protect Owen and Eli. And Marcus, trust Scout. He has already found what he was supposed to find. There is more. He will find the rest when it is time." Marcus read it twice. He folded it along its original crease and held it closed. The fire had burned down to a steady low heat. The storm outside had not lessened. Both boys were asleep against Scout Owen with his face in the dog's neck, the way he used to sleep against Claire when he was small, and she was still there. One thought arrived and settled and would not move. Billings. Before Victor's lawyers moved again. Before the next knock on the door in the dark. He gripped the drive in his fist and, the card with Margaret Sloane's name on it, and the only word in his head was morning. Margaret Sloane's office was on the second floor of a building on Main Street in Kalispell that looked like it had been built by people who believed in function before anything else. No lobby artwork, no decorative plants, the kind of place where serious work got done without apology. The receptionist showed Marcus and the boys in without making them wait, which told him Margaret had been expecting them with some urgency. Scout walked in and assessed the room in 4 seconds and then did something he rarely did with strangers. He walked directly to the woman standing behind the desk and sat down in front of her. Margaret Sloane was 60, maybe 62, with gray hair cut short and the kind of eyes that had seen enough people in crisis to know the difference between the ones who were going to hold together and the ones who were not. She looked at Scout for a moment, then at Marcus. "Your wife said the dog would do that," she said. "She said it meant you'd found the box." Marcus set the USB drive and the folded legal papers on her desk. He set Margaret's own business card beside them. He sat down. Owen and Eli took the chairs along the wall, and Scout positioned himself between the boys and the door, which he did in every unfamiliar room without instruction, out of something that was no longer training and had become character. Margaret sat down, picked up the drive, looked at it once, and put it in the drawer on her left. She had clearly seen it before, or one very much like it. She folded her hands on the desk. "I'm going to tell you several things in order," she said, "and I need you to let me finish each one before you respond. Some of it will be surprising. One part of it will be very hard to believe. I need you to stay with me through all of it." Marcus nodded. Claire's grandmother, Ruth Calloway, came from a family that homesteaded in Flathead County in 1911. Ruth inherited the property in 1962 when her father died. At the time, it was considered low-value land, rough terrain, poor for grazing, too remote for timber. What it had was mineral rights. Ruth's father had purchased the subsurface rights separately from the surface deed in 1944, when no one understood what that distinction would eventually be worth. Margaret paused to let that settle. Ruth held those rights for 60 years. She never sold them, never leased them, never registered them publicly in any way that connected them to the property's surface value. She was a private woman who did not trust institutions. Owen shifted in his chair. Scout glanced at him and then back to the door. In 2019, Margaret continued, a consortium of energy companies completed geological surveys of the Flathead Basin and identified significant natural gas deposits running under approximately 40,000 acres that included Ruth's subsurface holdings. They approached the county assessor's office to identify rights holders. Ruth's records were found. The consortium made an acquisition offer. She stopped. Ruth was 81 at the time and not well. She had a caretaker and one regular visitor. Margaret's voice did not change. Her son-in-law, Victor Hargrove. Something cold moved through the room. Marcus kept his face still. Victor was present at the negotiation meeting. He represented himself to the consortium as having power of attorney for Ruth, which he did not legally have. The consortium's attorneys conducted insufficient verification. An acquisition agreement was signed, and the payout was structured through a series of holding companies that Victor had established in the preceding 2 years. Ruth never saw the documents. She was told her land had been assessed and found to contain nothing of commercial value. Marcus said nothing. "Claire found out 14 months before she died," Margaret said. "She came to me because I had represented Ruth in an earlier property dispute, and she knew I had Ruth's original files. We spent 8 months building the documentation of what her father had done. We had the shell company registrations. We had the original power of attorney fraud. We had the consortium's internal correspondence acknowledging irregularities in the signing process." She reached into the drawer and set a second drive beside the one Marcus had brought. "And we had Ruth's signed statement recorded 6 weeks before she passed, naming Victor specifically and detailing every conversation she had been misled through." Eli was watching Margaret with his arms folded across his chest, his jaw set. Owen was very still. "The trust we established names you as the sole beneficiary and places Owen and Eli as secondary holders. The activation clause was designed to trigger automatically upon any custody action or property interference directed against your family." She held Marcus's eyes. "Victor activated it when he filed for emergency guardianship. He activated it again when his men cut the power lines to the homestead. Marcus said, "How much?" Margaret's voice was exactly level. The total value of the mineral rights acquisition held interest in associated trust accounts is $180 million. The room went quiet. Snow hit the window in a soft, irregular rhythm. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang once and stopped. The heat in the office made a low sound through the vents. Scout, for the first time since they had entered the building, exhaled slowly and lowered his head about 2 inches, as if something he had been waiting for had finally been said aloud. "That's not possible," Marcus said. "I understand why it seems that way." She never lived like someone who knew that was coming. "No," Margaret said quietly. "She didn't, because for most of her life she didn't know. And when she finally did know, she spent her remaining time making sure it reached you instead of disappearing into her father's holding accounts." Marcus looked at the 2 USB drives on the desk, the one from the hearth box in Ruth's homestead and the one Margaret had kept for 14 months waiting. He thought about Claire sitting across from this woman in this office, sick, running out of time, building the case with everything she had. He did not trust his voice for a moment. Owen was the one who broke the silence. He was looking at Marcus from across the room with an expression that was 8 years old and also somehow much older than that. "Mom did all of this," he said. "It was not quite a question. Your mother," Margaret, "was one of the most organized and determined people I have ever worked with in 40 years of practice." Scout stood up from his position and walked to Marcus's chair and pressed his shoulder against Marcus's leg. Marcus put his hand on the dog's back. He was reaching for something to say when Scout turned his head sharply toward the window. The growl was low and immediate. Marcus stood and looked down at Main Street. The black truck was parked on the opposite side of the road, far enough from the building to be in a legal space close enough to see clearly who came out of the front entrance. Clean Montana plates. The same plates. No one visible in the cab from 2 floors up. Margaret came to stand beside him. She looked down. "That vehicle is not a client of ours," she said. Marcus stepped back from the window. He picked up both drives from the desk and the legal documents and put them inside his jacket. He looked at Margaret. "We need to move faster than we planned." She was already at her computer. "I'll have the injunction filed by morning," she said. "Stay at the homestead. Don't go anywhere without your phone, and don't answer anything from Hargrove's legal team without calling me first." Marcus moved the boys toward the door. Scout went ahead of them into the hallway, scanning both directions. "Mr. Webb," Margaret said. He turned. "Claire was very specific about one thing in all of our conversations." She looked at him evenly. "She said you would not quit." He held that for a moment. Then he took his sons and his dog and went to find out who was in the truck. The elevator took 30 seconds. The lobby took another 20. By the time the three of them pushed through the front entrance into the cold of Main Street, the black truck was gone. Not pulled away slowly. Gone. The kind of absence that means whoever was there had been watching the building entrance and had left the moment Marcus appeared in the lobby window. They knew what he looked like now. They knew he had been to see Margaret. Whatever timeline Victor's people had been working on it had just compressed. The drive back to this homestead took just under 40 minutes in light snow, and Marcus used every one of them going over the shape of what he now knew, the way he had once gone over mission parameters, identifying the exposure points, the vectors of attack, the things that could be defended and the things that could not. Victor had spent years and considerable resources constructing what he had constructed. The guardianship filing was not a reaction to Marcus moving into the homestead. It was a response to Victor realizing that the trust activation clock had started. Victor knew Marcus had found something. The truck outside Margaret's office confirmed that Victor knew Marcus now knew the full picture. What Victor did not know was whether Marcus had the stomach to use it. Marcus knew the answer to that. They were a mile from the homestead turnoff when Owen, who had been quiet for the entire drive, said from the back seat, "Dad, are they going to try to take us?" The road was straight here, flat, running between snow-covered fields under a sky the color of old pewter. "No," Marcus said. He said it without hesitation, and he meant every letter of it. "Not while I'm breathing." In the back seat, Scout shifted his weight until his shoulder was against Eli's arm, and Eli leaned into it, and neither of them said anything. The power had come back on that morning. Marcus had restored the junction box connection himself with a length of replacement wire from the hardware run. Now it was out again. He did not need to check the junction box to know the cut would be clean and deliberate the same as before. Marcus parked the truck and walked the perimeter before letting the boys and Scout ranging 15 feet ahead of him through the snow with his nose processing the air in systematic sweeps. The cut in the line was at the junction box behind the barn, clean and deliberate, the kind of cut made with the right tool by someone who knew what they were looking at. The footprints leading to and from the box came from the eastern tree line and went back the same way, the same deep tread hiking boot sole as before, two sets of impressions going in and two coming out. More than one person, moving together. Marcus stood by the junction box in the failing afternoon light and looked toward the eastern tree line. Scout came back to him and stood close without being asked. He got the boys inside and lit the lanterns and rebuilt the fire. The next morning, Sheriff Ray Martinez drove up the access road in his department truck and sat in it for a moment before getting out, which Marcus noticed from the window and which told him something about the nature of the visit. A man comfortable with what he was bringing does not sit in his vehicle before getting out of it. Martinez was 50 broad through the shoulders and had the demeanor of someone who had been doing this job long enough to know the difference between the law and what the law was being used for. He declined coffee and stood in the main room with his hat in his hands and said what he came to say without decoration. Victor Hargrove's attorneys filed an amended emergency guardianship petition yesterday afternoon. It adds two claims. He paused. Domestic instability and psychological incapacitation. Scout had come to stand at Marcus's left side. Not forward, not aggressive, simply present. Marcus said, "I'm not here to serve anything," Martinez said, and the word "here" carried the weight of a much longer sentence. "I'm here because I drove past this property 2 nights ago at about 11:30, and there were 2 vehicles parked on the access road that I did not recognize and that were gone by the time I circled back." He turned his hat by the brim. "The tire impressions match the Hargrove Ranch work trucks. I know those tires. I've been looking at them since Victor bought out that fleet 8 years ago." Marcus said nothing. "The power line cut," Martinez said. "The prints behind the barn. I've been on this road more than I probably needed to be this week." He put his hat on. "That's all I can tell you. Officially, I'm here regarding the petition." He looked at Marcus steadily. "Unofficially, the men who have been on this property did not come from town." He left. Scout walked to the door and stood listening to the truck back down the access road. When the engine sound was fully gone, he turned and walked the perimeter of the main room, once checking each window in sequence, nose to the sill. Then he came back and sat at Marcus's feet and looked up at him. Eli was standing in the doorway to the back hall with his arms folded. "What does that mean?" "It means we keep moving," Marcus said. He was at the table going through the documents from the drive on his laptop when the sensation started. Not from any single trigger this time, but from the accumulation of everything, the cut lines and the boot prints and the petition with its clinical language about incapacitation and the particular way the deputy's words had landed. The custody threat landing on top of everything else. A tremor ran the length of his spine. His vision narrowed at the edges, the walls of the room moving in slightly, the way they did when this happened, the periphery losing definition. He put both hands flat on the table. He gripped the edge with his fingers and held. Scout was there in 3 seconds. Not a collision this time, not the broadside hit of the field. The dog pressed himself along the length of Marcus's left leg from hip to knee and stood there with his full weight committed, steady, and even like ballast. Marcus could feel the dog's breathing through his jeans. Regular, deliberate, real. The narrowing at the edges of his vision held for a moment and then began to ease. He breathed in through his nose for 4 counts. Held it for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. "I'm here," he said. Not "I'm okay." He was done saying "I'm okay" to an empty room. He was here. He was in this kitchen, on this property, with his sons in the next room in a case that was going to court, and a one who weighed 78 pounds and had the patience of someone who had survived things and come out the other side still willing to stand next to you. The tremor in his spine released. He kept his hands on the table for another minute. Scout stayed against his leg until Marcus's breathing had gone fully regular, and then moved to the other side of the room and lay down watching him. Recovery took 5 sentences instead of 8. He noticed that. He filed it away somewhere that was not about numbers, but about direction. He stood up. He straightened. Owen was in the doorway. He had not said anything. He had been there for some of it, and he stood now with the expression of a child who is trying to decide if what he just witnessed means things are falling apart or means things are going to be all right. Marcus walked to him and crouched down. "I have hard days," he said. "That was one of those." Owen considered this. "Scout helps." "Scout helps," Marcus agreed. Owen's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile but was on its way there. He looked at Scout across the room. "He's really good at his job." "The best I've ever seen," Marcus said. "Let's get dinner." That night, after the boys were asleep, Marcus stood at the window of the main room, looking out at the dark field, and felt the shape of the situation settle into something that had angles and dimensions he could work with. Victor was escalating. The legal machinery was moving. The footprints and the cut lines were Victor's way of communicating that he had reach and was not afraid to use it. He was trying to establish control of the perimeter before the courtroom battle began. What Victor did not know was that Claire had already been inside every room of that battle. Scout was awake beside him, watching the same darkness beyond the window. The dog's ears moved once toward the eastern tree line, held for 3 seconds, then relaxed. Whatever had been out there tonight had either left or gone still. Either way, Scout had logged it. In the morning, Marcus said quietly to the dog, and to no one, and to Claire, "We find the rest." The root cellar was something Marcus had noted in his first week on the property and set aside as a structural concern rather than a discovery. A low door set into the foundation on the north side of the house, wooden swollen in its frame from decades of moisture, sealed with an iron hasp and a padlock that was heavy with rust. He had assumed it held old canning equipment or rusted tools. He had added it to the list of things he would get to when the more urgent repairs were done. Scout led him to it on a Tuesday morning when the snow was light and new. He had not told the dog to look for anything. They were walking the property, the daily circuit that had become routine, and Scout broke from the usual path and went directly to the north foundation wall and stood at the root cellar door and turned to look at Marcus with an expression that contained no ambiguity whatsoever. Marcus got the bolt cutters from the truck. The hasp came off with 2 clean cuts. The door took both hands and a braced foot to pull open the swollen wood, releasing from its frame with a sound like something exhaling after a long time of holding its breath. The smell that came up from the interior was cold earth and old wood, and something underneath those things that Marcus could not name. Scout went in first. The cellar was 8 feet deep, accessed by a ladder of iron rungs set into the stone. Marcus climbed down with a flashlight and stood in a low-ceilinged space that ran maybe 15 feet north under the foundation shelved on both sides, with the remnants of Ruth Calloway's long occupation of this land. Mason jars, seed packets that had been stored in tins, a few hand tools hung on wooden pegs. Scout was at the far end, nosing along the base of the back wall. Marcus brought the flashlight over and ran it across the stonework. The mortar between the stones at the back of the cellar was a slightly different color from the mortar between the stones on the sides. Newer by a few decades. Someone had opened this wall and closed it again, and they had done it well enough that it would take a specific reason to notice. He found the edges with his hands. A panel approximately 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall, fitted flush with the surrounding wall, held in place by nothing more than its own close fit in the opening. He worked his fingers into the gap at the left edge and pulled. The panel came free. The hollow behind it was dry. Whoever had built it had made it with care. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and set at the back of the hollow where the deepest cold could not reach them, a second steel box smaller than the first, and beside it a canvas roll tied with cord that had gone stiff with age. Scout sat at the entrance of the hollow and watched Marcus take both items out. The box opened without a lock, a simple latch mechanism that released cleanly. Inside, a second USB drive. A folded document that appeared to be a ledger page, names and dates and numbers in handwriting Marcus did not recognize, and a series of photographs printed on paper showing documents with Victor Hargrove's name on them and signatures that appeared in multiple places. And beneath all of it, a sealed envelope. Not Claire's handwriting on this one. He read his name in letters that were unfamiliar, and then below his name, 4 words that stopped him. "For when you're ready." He opened the canvas roll and found a second envelope, this one sealed with wax. Claire's handwriting. His name again, and below it, second, read second. He sat down on the earthen floor of the root cellar with Scout pressed against his right side and the cold coming through the stone walls and the flashlight propped against the base of the shelf, and he opened the second envelope, Claire's envelope, and began to read. The letter was 4 pages, written close the way she wrote when she had a great deal to say and was trying not to waste space. I found out on a Thursday, it began. That was the detail I kept coming back to. A Thursday in March, I was in the hospital for the third round, and I had my laptop because you know how I can't sleep in those places, and I was trying to distract myself. And I ended up looking at the county assessor records because I was thinking about the homestead and wondering what it might be worth. And I found a notation about a subsurface rights transfer and the holding company name attached to it. And when I looked up the holding company, I found my father's name. Marcus read without stopping. I want you to know what I did not do. I did not tell you. I know that is not what you would have wanted. But I was sick and running out of time, and if I had told you, you would have spent every remaining hour we had together in a fight that would have consumed us both, and I could not give him those hours. They were mine. I wanted them to be ours. He turned the page. The thing about my father Marcus is that he has always been afraid of you. Not physically, I don't mean that. He is afraid of the fact that you are honest in a way he does not understand and cannot replicate. He married money and built power on top of it, and he has never done one honest thing in his life that did not serve his own position. When I brought you home the first time, he smiled at you over the dinner table and said to me afterward that you were a simple man who would always be limited by his simplicity. He meant it as an insult. I have thought about it almost every day since because I think it was the truest thing he ever said, and he had no idea. Scout shifted against him and laid his head across Marcus's knee. The money is real, Marcus, all of it. I know how it sounds. I know you will not want it to change anything, and I know you well enough to know that you will try to find a way to make it mean something beyond what it is. I think you will succeed. You always do. I cannot tell you how much I wish I could see what you build with it. Page 3. I am sorry. I am sorry for leaving you with this instead of beside you in it. I am sorry I could not protect Owen and Eli from losing their mother. I am sorry for every conversation we did not have because I was trying to protect the time we had left. I was wrong about some of those. I know that. And then the last paragraph in letters that were slightly unsteady in a way the rest of the letter had not been, as if she had stopped and started and finished it in a different hour or a different state. You are the most honest person I know. You were never limited by it. You were made of it. I chose you because I knew you were the only one with the patience and the strength to carry this and come out the other side still standing. I was right about you, Marcus. I was right about you from the first night. He did not move for a long time. The cold in the cellar was real and complete, and he sat in it with the pages in his hands and the dog's weight across his knee and the silence of the root cellar around him, and he let himself cry in the way that had not happened since they buried Claire on the hill outside Kalispell. Not the controlled grief he had maintained in the hospital and at the service and in front of the boys for 8 months, but the actual thing underneath all of that, which was enormous and had been waiting for a place to go. Scout did not move, did not lift his head, just stayed. Marcus did not know how long it had been when he heard the voices from above. Small voices, worried. Dad. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked up at the square of pale winter sky visible through the open cellar door. Down here, he called. Come down. Owen came first down the iron rungs careful, then Eli. And they came to him in the dim light of the root cellar, and he held out one arm, and they both came in under it, and Scout shifted to make room and then wrapped himself around all 3 of them as much as his size allowed. Your mom wrote me a letter, he said. She left this here. She knew what was coming, and she planned for it. He felt Owen's hand grip his jacket. Both of these letters are going to court. She did the work, you understand. She built the case. We're going to carry it the rest of the way. Eli pulled back enough to look at him. His face was doing the thing where he was trying very hard to hold everything in order. Is she still helping us? Eli asked. Marcus looked at his son. She never stopped, he said. Before they climbed out of the cellar, Marcus noticed the folder icon visible on the screen of his laptop in the image he had taken of the second USB drive. He had not looked at the drive's contents yet. The folder at the top of the directory was labeled in Claire's naming convention, organized and deliberate. It was labeled Court. He tried to open it. Password protected. He looked at the drive in his hand. He looked at Scout. Margaret would have it. Margaret would know the password. Everything Claire had been building toward a courtroom. All of it was in that folder. Tomorrow. Billings. They were almost to the part where the fight happened in the open. He locked the cellar panel back into the wall and climbed up into the cold air with his sons and his dog and went inside to get ready for whatever came next. They came on a Friday morning at 7:45 when the light was still flat and gray and the temperature had not climbed above 12 degrees. Marcus heard the engines first. Two of them heavy vehicles moving up the access road without any urgency, the sound of machines that had the weight of official process behind them. He was already at the window when the first deputy's truck appeared, followed by a second, and behind both of them a large black SUV, not the ranch truck from the access road, not the vehicle from Kalispell, but something newer and heavier with tinted windows and the particular build of a vehicle that carried people who did not intend to get out and negotiate. Scout was beside Marcus at the window. Every muscle in the dog's body went to wire. "Boys," Marcus said without turning from the window, "back of the house. Stay there until I come get you." He heard them go. He put on his jacket. He did not take anything else. He opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch and stood there, hands visible, while the two deputy trucks parked in the open space before the house and the black SUV stopped behind them. 4 deputies got out. They were not comfortable. He could see it in the way they moved, the way none of them were looking directly at him, the way 2 of them were carrying paperwork rather than having it holstered, which meant they were hoping this was going to be administrative rather than anything else. The lead deputy, a man Marcus didn't recognize, walked toward the porch with the papers forward, and his voice set at a volume intended to sound reasonable. "Mr. Webb, I have a court order here authorizing the temporary transfer of custody of Owen and Eli Webb to the care of Victor Hargrove pending the outcome of the emergency guardianship hearing. I need you to cooperate." Marcus stood on the porch steps and said nothing. He heard the screened interior door behind him. Scout came through it. Not fast, not explosive, but with the particular kind of certainty that is its own form of speed. The dog cleared the door and came down the steps and planted himself at the bottom equidistant between Marcus and the 4 deputies in the posture that Marcus had seen in briefings and in training and in 2 actual deployments. Low, weight distributed, the musculature along Scout's neck and shoulders fully engaged. The sound that came from him was not a bark. It was continuous and low, and carried in it the specific information that this animal had been trained by professionals and was not performing. All 4 deputies stopped. The lead deputy's hand moved involuntarily toward his belt and then stopped and moved back to the papers. Into the silence, another engine. Coming up the access road fast. A gray sedan moving with purpose, dust rising behind it in the cold air. It stopped behind the SUV, and Margaret Sloan got out while it was still settling. She walked past the deputies without acknowledging them and came to stand on the steps beside Marcus with a folder in her hand. "Federal injunction filed at 6:45 this morning, blocking enforcement of any custody action, pending resolution of the estate fraud litigation," she said. She held the folder out toward the lead deputy. "The guardianship petition was filed in direct response to the trust activation. That's a conflict of interest that voids the proceeding. Your paperwork is unenforceable as of this morning." The deputy looked at the folder. He looked at his partner. He took the folder. Scout had not moved or changed anything about his posture. The deputy stepped back in the small collective way that people step back when the shape of a situation has changed. Then the rear door of the black SUV opened. Victor Hargrove stepped out. Marcus had not seen him since the night of the gate. He looked the same in the architecture of him, the way he held himself, the careful economy of his movements. But there was something underneath the composure that had not been there before, a tightness in the jaw that the composure was working harder to cover. He walked past his deputies and past Margaret and stopped 6 feet from Marcus. Scout turned and placed himself between Victor and Marcus with a precision that left no room for interpretation. Victor looked at the dog. He looked at Marcus. "You are a man with no income, no profession, and no standing in this county," he said. "You are living on property you have no legal right to occupy. You have my grandchildren in a condemned building." His voice was the same as it had been in the kitchen of the estate, level, declarative, each word placed with the confidence of someone who had never had to revise their fundamental assessment of their own power. I am trying to give those boys a future. You are trying to make sure no one looks at what you did to Ruth's estate, Marcus said. Victor's expression did not change. Claire chose me, Marcus said. Ruth chose this land and what it meant, and Claire made sure it would reach me, and it did. You spent 20 years building what you built, and Claire spent 8 months taking it apart, and she was dying while she did it. He watched Victor's face for the thing he was waiting for. You cannot win in a room where her documentation exists, and it exists. Scout barked once, a single sound. Absolute. It went out across the snow and the bare field and the tree line and came back as an echo. Victor flinched, not much. But Marcus saw it and Margaret saw it, and the deputies who were now 3 feet further back than they had been saw it. The first real crack in 40 years of architecture. The man had never flinched at anything in his life, and a dog had done it in a fraction of a second. The lead deputy handed the folder back to Margaret. He said something quiet to his partner. They walked toward their trucks. Victor's lawyer materialized at his elbow and said something low and urgent. Victor did not move for a moment. Then he said, "This is not finished." Marcus looked at him. He felt nothing that was wasted. What he felt was the cold air on his face and Scout's warmth at his knee and the weight of the drive in his jacket pocket with Claire's handwriting on the folder inside it. "Yes," he said, "it is. You just haven't been to court yet." Victor got in the SUV. The door closed. The SUV reversed down the access road, then the deputy trucks, then Margaret's sedan was the only vehicle left, and Margaret was on her phone before she had taken 3 steps. Scout did not relax until the last engine sound was gone. Then he turned and trotted back up the porch steps and pushed his way through the screen door to where the boys were waiting in the back of the house. Marcus stood alone on the porch in the cold. He thought about what happens when a man with 40 years of constructed power enters a courtroom with a woman's voice on a recording and everything she documented in the last months of her life and faces the people she documented it for. He thought about Thursday, the hearing date Margaret had texted him as she drove away. He looked out at the field. 3 days. The federal courthouse in Billings was built from the same conviction as Margaret's office building, the belief that function was its own kind of authority. Dark wood benches, high windows that let in flat winter light without warmth. A gallery that was fuller than Marcus had expected because news in a county like this moved along the same routes as water and found every low place before anyone thought to stop it. He recognized 2 faces from Whitefish, a woman who ran the hardware store where he had bought weather stripping, a man he had seen twice at the gas station on Highway 2, who had nodded at him with the specific nod of a person who has been watching a situation from a distance and has formed an opinion about it. He sat at the plaintiff's table in the suit he had worn to Claire's funeral, pressed and brushed, but showing the age of a garment that had not been bought for regular use. Scout was under the table with one paw resting on the toe of Marcus's boot, which the dog had done from the moment Marcus sat down and had not stopped doing. Margaret was to his left, organized to a degree that was quietly formidable documents arranged in a sequence she had built over 14 months and would not need to consult because she already knew it the way a musician knows a piece before sitting down to play it. Owen and Eli sat at the first row of the gallery behind Marcus with Ruth Calloway's neighbor, an older woman named Dora who had come without being asked, and who both boys had taken to immediately in the way children sometimes take to people who carry steadiness in them like something structural. Victor sat at the defense table with 2 attorneys whose suits cost more than Marcus's truck. He had not looked at Marcus since entering the room. The evidence came in the order Margaret had constructed it, each item placed before the judge, with the quiet precision of someone who understood that a courtroom was not a place for drama, but for sequence, and that sequence done correctly was its own form of devastating. Under the table, Scout shifted until both front paws were flat on the floor and his chin rested on Marcus's boot. He would not move from that position for the next 2 hours. First photographs of the cut power main behind the homestead taken by Marcus the morning after it happened. The county assessor's notation in the field log confirming no scheduled maintenance in that area. Margaret's voice was even. This was not weather damage. This was deliberate infrastructure interference directed at a property currently in dispute. Second still images pulled from the trail camera Marcus had mounted in the barn eaves on day 5 of their stay, which he had not mentioned to anyone. The black truck visible on the access road at 11:48 in the evening, license plate partially visible. The county vehicle registration records Margaret had subpoenaed, matching the plate fragment to a truck registered to Hargrove Ranch, LLC. This was active surveillance of the plaintiff's residence by agents of the defendant. Third, the Shell Company registration documents from both USB drives laid out in chronological order across 8 years, each one a layer of the structure Victor had built to redirect the mineral rights payout. The consortium's internal correspondence, which Margaret had obtained through discovery, containing a flagged email from their legal team, noting that the power of attorney documentation requires additional verification, and a reply from the project coordinator reading, "Timeline pressure, proceed." Victor's signatures appearing in 4 places they should not have appeared. This was sustained financial fraud executed against a vulnerable elderly woman by her own son-in-law for a period of not less than 3 years. Marcus watched the judge. The judge was a woman of about 60 with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that did not give readings. She read each document as it was submitted and asked 3 questions in the first hour that were short and precise and suggested she had already understood most of this before the hearing began. The gallery was very quiet. Fourth, the signed statements from Martinez and a second deputy entered as sworn affidavits. Martinez's statement confirmed the tire track identification. The second deputy confirmed a separate incident in which a Hargrove Ranch employee had approached the Homestead property line and retreated when confronted. The defendant used institutional proximity to law enforcement to create an atmosphere of legal threat against the plaintiff. Victor's attorneys objected 3 times in 20 minutes. The judge sustained none of them. Each time a lawyer's voice rose across the aisle, Scout's ears rotated once toward the sound and then returned forward, the way a soldier tracks a noise without turning his head. Fifth, Margaret picked up her phone from the table and looked at Marcus once before she pressed play. The recording came through the courtroom speakers with the specific acoustic quality of a phone held close to a voice, intimate and immediate, the sound of a woman sitting somewhere quiet and speaking with care. "My name is Claire Webb. I am making this statement on October 14th. I have a terminal diagnosis and I have approximately 4 to 6 months remaining. I am of sound mind and I am recording this voluntarily and without coercion." A pause. The sound of breathing. "My father, Victor Hargrove, has engaged in a systematic effort to conceal the value of my maternal grandmother's estate from me and from my family. I have documented this effort over the course of 8 months with the assistance of my attorney, Margaret Sloan." Another pause. Steadier. "I am recording this because I may not survive to testify in person. I want it understood that everything I have documented was done knowingly and deliberately by my father, and that I was prevented from knowing about my grandmother's estate for most of my adult life. I want it understood that my husband, Marcus Webb, had no knowledge of any of this and has been subject to active interference by my father since before my death. And I want it understood that I trust him completely. With the estate, with our children, with everything." The voice stopped. The courtroom held what had just been in it. Marcus had his eyes closed. Scout pressed upward against his boot. He could hear Owen behind him, the small sound of a child trying very hard not to cry out loud and mostly succeeding. Scout pressed upward, harder against his boot, as if he too could feel the weight of the voice in the room. Marcus sat with Claire's voice still in the air around him and let it be there. He had not planned what happened next. He was sitting and then he was standing, not from a decision, but from something that had run out of room to stay down. "Your Honor." His voice came out level. It surprised him. The judge looked at him. "I served in the United States Army for 14 years. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. I have held men while they died and I have attended their families afterward, and I have tried to be the person that service asked me to be. I came home and I met Claire Hargrove, and I built a life with her, and we had 2 sons who are sitting behind me right now." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I am not going to stand here and argue that I am a perfect man or a perfect foster, and I have a diagnosis that I am working with every day. But those boys are my sons, and they were Claire's sons, and she trusted me with them and with everything she built in the last year of her life, and I will not let anyone take them from me. Not for money and not for power and not for the kind of pride that requires other people to stay small so it can stay large. He sat down. The judge wrote something on her notepad. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up. The emergency guardianship petition filed by Victor Hargrove is dismissed with prejudice. Full legal custody of Owen Au and Eli Webb is confirmed with their father Marcus Webb effective immediately. She turned a page. I am additionally ordering a formal investigation by the State Attorney General's office into the mineral rights acquisition and the associated financial instruments named in the plaintiff's documentation. The matter of civil damages will proceed to a separate hearing. She set her pen down. This court is satisfied that the trust established by Ruth Calloway operates as documented and that the funds held therein are to be released to the named beneficiary. Scout barked once. It went through the courtroom like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Owen made a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely, and Marcus turned in his chair, and his sons came through the gate and into him, and he held them both with his arms and his face in the space between their heads, and for a moment there was nothing in the room but that. Across the aisle, Victor's attorneys were speaking urgently to him in low voices. Victor was not listening to them. He was looking at Owen and Eli, his grandsons, with an expression that Marcus had never seen on the man's face before. It was not regret exactly. It was something that had come before regret, the moment just prior to understanding what you have cost yourself when the full accounting of it first becomes visible. Victor looked like a man seeing a number he had not expected. He looked like a man who was not yet sure what to do about it. Marcus stood with his arms around his sons and watched him and said nothing. This was not the ending of something. The investigation would take months. The civil case would take longer. But the legal weaponry Victor had been building was disarmed, and the voice of Marcus's dead wife had been heard by everyone in that room, and the sons she had protected were going home. Scout came out from under the table and walked to Marcus's side and pressed his shoulder against Marcus's knee. It was enough. They drove back to the homestead in the late afternoon light, long gold shadows coming across the Flathead Valley, the kind of light that only exists in winter when the sun is too low to be anywhere but at the edges of things. The boys slept in the back seat the way they always slept after large things happened suddenly and completely, with Scout stretched across both of them. Marcus drove with the window cracked and the cold air on his left hand and did not turn the radio on. He climbed the ridge before dawn the next morning. Apgar Ridge ran along the north face of the valley in a long spine of pine and rock that Claire had described in her letter as the place Ruth had taken her every summer until she was 12, and then again the summer after that, and then it became the place Claire went alone when she needed to think. Marcus had put the wooden cross up in the first week. Simple pine with her name carved in it, in the year she was born, in the year she died, and nothing else because nothing else was necessary. Scout stayed close. Occasionally the dog's shoulder touched Marcus's leg when the trail narrowed the casual contact of a creature that understood something about proximity and what it meant. At the top, the cross stood in the early dark with the first gray light just beginning to separate the ridgeline from the sky. Marcus stood in front of it and did not try to organize what he was feeling into anything presentable. I got both your letters, he said. His breath made shapes in the cold air. I wish you'd told me sooner. We could have done this together. He stopped. The quiet of the ridge was complete and specific, the silence of high ground before the world below it wakes up. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from him. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. You spent the last year of your life fighting a war I didn't know was happening, and you did it alone because you were trying to give us the time we had left. He stopped talking for a moment. Scout sat beside him facing the same direction. The boys are all right, Marcus said. Owen cried in the truck on the way home, and he tried not to let me see, and I pretended not to notice the way you used to let me do that when I had bad nights. Eli has started talking to Scout the way he used to talk to you. Just quietly next to him like he knows Scout is listening. He put his hand on the top of the cross, the wood rough under his palm. I think Scout knows things. The sky was lightening in the east, the dark above the ridge beginning to separate into gradations of blue. Something moved through him then. A fragment brief and uninvited. Dust, a rooftop, the particular quality of light in Kandahar at altitude, gone in 2 seconds. He reached down and put his hand on Scout's back. The dog was already there, had already moved close without being asked, his fur warm and real under Marcus's palm. Marcus held it for a moment. The ridge, the cold, the cross, Scout's breathing against his legs, steady as a metronome. He let go. The weight that lifted was not all of it, but it was enough for this morning. He stood straighter than he had when he arrived. He was turning to go when Scout stopped. The dog had walked 3 feet down the trail and then gone still, nose dropping to the ground near the base of the post that held the cross. He pushed his nose into the snow there, methodical reading, something specific. Then he began to dig, not urgently, carefully, the way he had dug at the hearth that first week with the deliberateness of an animal that already knows what it has found. Marcus crouched beside him. 6 inches down under snow and the frozen surface of the soil, Scout's paw touched something that made a small sound. Hard. Metallic. Marcus reached in and worked his fingers around it and brought it up. A small tin, the kind sold in general stores for 60 years, unchanged, sealed with its lid pressed tight. He pried it open. Inside, wrapped in a square of cloth, was a ring. Claire's wedding ring, which had been missing from the hospital the night she died, and which Marcus had assumed was lost in the institutional confusion of that night and had stopped letting himself think about, because thinking about it led nowhere good. And beneath the ring, a piece of paper folded twice in handwriting that was not Claire's. Larger, older, the letters formed with a particular care that suggested someone who had learned to write by hand and taken the habit seriously. He unfolded it and read it by the growing light. It said, "For the man who loved my granddaughter the way she deserved to be loved. You will find this when you are ready for it, Ruth." Marcus read it twice. He sat back on his heels in the snow on the ridge with the ring in one hand and Ruth Calloway's note in the other, and Scout beside him, and the light came up over the eastern mountains in a long, slow roll of gold and pale blue, and the valley below emerged from the dark piece by piece, the white fields and the dark tree lines, and the thin road cutting north toward the homestead. Claire had known. Ruth had known. They had planned it together across the same years Victor had spent constructing his architecture of control, and what they had built was not a legal document or a financial trust or a recorded testimony, though it was all of those things too. What they had built was this: a man on a ridge at dawn holding his wife's wedding ring and knowing that he had been chosen by people who had seen him clearly and found him worth choosing. He took the chain from around his neck, the one that held his dog tags. He threaded the ring onto it beside them. He held it for a moment, the metal warming in his hand. Then he put it back against his chest. Scout stood, looked out over the valley, and then turned toward the trail down. He waited. Marcus stood. He took a long breath of cold, clean air. "All right," he said. They went down. The Callaway Webb Veterans Retreat broke ground in late April when the snow had retreated enough to let the heavy equipment in from the county road. The name had been Owen's suggestion, offered quietly at the kitchen table one evening, and Marcus had not been able to think of a single reason to change it. Ruth's land, Claire's trust, their home. The construction crew from Whitefish worked 6 days a week through the spring, and the town that had watched Marcus through truck windows in January came out in a different configuration entirely. Dora brought lunch on Tuesdays. The man from the hardware store showed up one Saturday with a truck bed full of donated lumber and 2 friends with nail guns. The pastor from the Whitefish Methodist Church, a calm man named Hensley, who never asked Marcus about his theology and seemed to grasp instinctively that the offer of presents was more useful than the offer of answers, came 3 Thursdays running and worked on fence posts without saying much. Scout moved through all of it like the property's foreman, conducting his rounds between the construction activity and the main house in the field where the training area was taking shape, receiving pats from construction workers with the dignified patience of someone accepting tribute that was their due. The first veterans arrived in July, 4 of them referred through a program Margaret had connected Marcus with in Billings. They came with the specific quality of men who were managing something large and had not yet found the container for it. Marcus did not try to explain or organize their time. He put them to work. There was always work. The physical, simple, purposeful kind that pays out directly into the body at the end of a day. And he had learned in his own first months at the property that there was something in that transaction that was not therapy but was adjacent to it and sometimes more useful. Scout was the retreat's first and most effective staff member. He knew. That was the only way Marcus could put it. The dog moved toward the people who were having the worst days and stayed with them, with an attention that was neither sympathetic nor demanding, but simply unwavering. And Marcus had watched veterans who had not cried in years cry into the fur at the back of Scout's neck, and he had watched the dog stay through all of it without shifting or moving away, as steady as the ridge. Eli had taken to helping with the K9 training sessions that Marcus ran on weekend mornings, learning the commands with the same methodical focus he brought to everything, and Owen had developed the habit of tying small ribbon markers to the trees along the perimeter trail with the names of soldiers written on them in permanent marker. He had a list he kept in his back pocket, names from Marcus's service, and names he had asked about and looked up, and he added to it when he heard of new ones. On a Saturday in late August, a truck drove up the access road that Marcus recognized. Victor got out alone. He walked toward the main house with the particular quality of motion that belongs to people who are uncertain of their reception and are trying not to show it. He was wearing a canvas jacket that had seen used, not the kind of clothing the man across the dinner table at the estate had worn, and he looked diminished and also somehow more like a person than he had before. Marcus came off the porch and stood in the yard. Victor stopped 10 feet away. Scout had come from the direction of the training field and now stood at Marcus's side, watching the older man without the coiled potential of the standoff in January. Alert but not aggressive. Reading. "I'm not here with attorneys," Victor said. "I'm not here to contest anything. The investigation is what it is." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I lost my daughter. I came very close to losing my grandsons." He stopped. "Started again. I have spent a considerable portion of my life building things that turned out to be the wrong things to build, and I did not understand that until recently. I am not asking you to forgive me. I don't think I've earned that." He looked at Marcus directly. "I am asking if I can see Owen and Eli." The sound of voices came from the training field. Eli's voice issuing a command. Scout's ear rotated toward it. Marcus thought about Claire at the kitchen table, both hands around her coffee cup, looking up for no reason and smiling. He thought about what she would want this to look like. Not what he wanted it to look like. What she would want. "Supervised visits," he said, "regularly scheduled. They need to know what to expect." He held Victor's gaze. One incident, one moment where either of them feels unsafe or pressured, and it ends. Permanently. "We understood," Victor said, and the word came out with the quietness of someone accepting terms they know they do not deserve to be offered. "They deserve to have a grandfather," Marcus said. "They deserve a world where that's possible." That was what Claire wanted. Not the money, not the case. This. Victor said nothing for a moment. He was looking in the direction of the training field where the voices were. His jaw moved once. Scout took 2 steps away from Marcus's side and sniffed once at the ground between them, and then walked back to the porch and lay down in the afternoon sun, which was the most unambiguous thing the dog had done all day. Owen and Eli came around the corner of the barn at a run, Eli 2 steps ahead, as always, both of them stopping when they saw the visitor. They looked at Marcus. Marcus gave them the small nod that meant it was their call. They walked slowly toward their grandfather under the pale late summer sky, and Victor met them there in the middle of the yard that had been Ruth Calloway's yard and was now something new. And the boys spoke to him in the careful way of children who are testing ice, and he answered them quietly, and Scout watched all of it from the porch without comment. There was no word for what that moment was except true. This is what Claire wanted. Not a world emptied of the damage that had been done. A world where love still had enough room to grow, despite it. 1 year later, the Callaway Webb Veterans Retreat held its first formal dedication, a gathering that filled the yard with more people than Marcus had imagined possible in January, standing in the October cold with hot coffee and the specific warmth of people who have watched something difficult become something good. The valley had changed with the season. The fields were gold where they had been white. The tree lines had turned colors that looked borrowed from somewhere else. The main building stood straight and solid, its windows lit from within, and the training field where Scout had spent most of his summer was marked with the wooden stakes Eli had driven in at every corner. Scout's shoulder scar was barely visible under the thick fur that had grown back over it, a slight irregularity in the coat that you would only see if you were looking and knew to look. The boys were taller. Eli was learning Spanish from one of the veterans methodical keeping a notebook. Owen had planted a garden in the spring that was still producing the last of its tomatoes, and had already begun planning what he would put in it next year. Marcus had started sleeping most nights. Not every night, but most. On the morning of the dedication, before anyone arrived, he stood on the ridge alone. The valley below was still in the early cold, the first light coming across it from the east. The retreat building small and clear in the distance. He had the ring on the chain against his chest. He had the mong at his shamon. He had not made a speech for the dedication. What he had said when Margaret asked him to say something was that he would stand there and let the place speak for itself, which was what Claire had always told him. Words were for not to replace the thing, but to point at it. He thought about a man and two boys and a disc arriving at a broken property in the dark in January, with nowhere else to go, and how the dog had known first and how the rest of it had followed from that. Scout pressed against his left side and looked out over the valley. There are men who come home from war carrying things that have no name and no shape that fits inside ordinary life. And most of them will tell you that the hardest part is not the noise or the dark or the particular weight of what was lost. The hardest part is the silence afterward, when you are supposed to be fine, and the silence has things living in it. Some men find their way through it, and some men do not. And some men, if they are patient enough and honest enough and fortunate enough to have a good dog, find that the silence has been holding something for them all along. Something their wife hid in the foundation of a house at the edge of a valley and trusted to the only one she believed would stay long enough to find it. Scout barked once, sharp and clear and certain, the sound going out across the Flathead Valley in the cold morning air, in the distance between what had been and what had been built in its place. Marcus put his hand on the dog's back. He looked down at the valley where the lights were coming on. He went down to meet it. If this story moved you, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you want more stories about people who refused to quit, who fought for what was right and honored the ones they lost along the way, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.